Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the show that digs through the noise to find the signals, the really important ideas shaping our world.
And today we're tackling something that probably hits close to home for a lot of you listening.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone who's ever poured their heart and soul into a project maybe felt like just a cog in a big machine.
Or maybe navigated the ups and downs of the gig economy, that constant hustle.
Right. There's this inherent tension, isn't there? You're excited to build something, but there's always that background worry. Am I going to be valued fairly? Are my contributions actually seen?
It's a huge issue. We hear the horror stories all the time. Startup founders fighting over equity splits, deals falling apart.
Or just that feeling of insecurity in freelance work, you know?
Yeah.
No real stake, no long-term anchor.
And this taps into a really fundamental conflict in how we organize society, doesn't it? How do we get the innovation, the drive of capitalism?
Without the huge wealth gaps and that feeling that it's always dog-eat-dog.
Exactly. And then you look at collectivism, the focus on fairness and shared outcomes.
But then you worry, okay, does that slow things down? Does it dampen individual motivation? It's a tough balance.
It's a really tough balance. And now, layer on top of that, rapid technological change, automation.
Oh, yeah. That's the big one looming. What happens when traditional jobs start disappearing? It's not just economic. It's about purpose.
Right. It could genuinely lead to a crisis of purpose, even social fragmentation. If work provides identity and connection, and that foundation starts to shake, what takes its place?
That's why this deep dive feels so relevant right now. So our mission today is to really get under the hood of a proposed third way. It's this hybrid economic model called the dynamic pie.
We want to unpack its core ideas, how it's supposed to tackle these big problems we've just talked about.
What are the potential upsides? What are the tricky parts, the challenges? Consider this your briefing on an idea that could really change how we work together and share the rewards.
And we're really curious to hear what resonates with you, what questions pop up as we explore this.
Okay, so let's dive in. The dynamic pie. What's the absolute core principle here?
All right. At its very heart, it's this idea: your percentage share of whatever the venture produces the reward should always perfectly match your percentage share of the at-risk contributions you put in.
Always equal. Okay, that sounds simple, but hang on. That's radically different from how things usually work, right?
Yeah.
The typical model is, well, you try to guess contributions up front.
Exactly. That's what Mike Moyer, the creator, calls the fix and fight model. You fix percentages early on, often based on guesswork about who will do what.
And then inevitably, reality unfolds differently and you end up fighting about whether that initial split was fair. I've seen that happen.
It happens constantly. This dynamic model says, forget the crystal ball. Your share literally adjusts based on what you actually contribute day by day, week by week.
Wow. So it's based on verifiable inputs, not promises or projections. That alone sounds like it could prevent a ton of conflict.
That's the fundamental goal. And these at-risk contributions, what are they? Well, it's defined pretty broadly. It's things like unpaid time you spend working on the project, money you put in or spend out of pocket,
right?
Critical ideas you contribute, maybe key relationships you bring, even tangible things like lending equipment or using your office space if you're not being paid fair market rate for it immediately.
So anything you put on the line without getting paid back right away at its full value.
Precisely. Anything where you're taking a risk alongside the venture.
But how on earth do you compare, say, 10 hours of expert coding time with a $500 cash investment, or maybe bringing in a crucial client relationship? It feels like comparing apples and, I don't know, oranges and pears.
That's the clever part. They use a fictional unit of account called slices. Think of them like casino chips or points in a game.
Okay, slices, like poker chips, got it.
Exactly. Every different type of contribution gets converted into these slices. But crucially, it's not just based on the fair market value of the contribution. There's also a risk multiplier applied.
A risk multiplier. Tell me more about that.
So, for instance, unpaid time your labor might be valued at its fair market rate, but then multiplied by 2x to get the number of slices.
Okay, 2x for time. What about cash?
Cash usually gets a higher multiplier, often 4x, though sometimes you see 3x implementations.
4 times. Why so much higher for cash? What makes it 4 times riskier or more valuable in this system?
Well, a few reasons. Early stage cash is scarce. It's often harder to come by than time. There's a higher immediate risk that cash could just disappear if the venture fails quickly.
Right, makes sense.
And there's a significant opportunity cost. That cash could be invested elsewhere, potentially earning returns. So the multiplier reflects that higher risk and economic value.
Okay, that logic tracks. And you mentioned something about a well for cash.
Ah, yes, the well. This is another neat mechanism. When an investor puts cash into the venture, it doesn't instantly turn into slices for them.
It doesn't, so they don't get ownership right away.
Not fully. The cash sits in this figurative well. Slices are only allocated to the investor as the company actually spends that money wisely on approved expenses.
Oh, interesting. So if I invest $10,000, I don't get all my slices on day one. I get them gradually as the company uses that $10K to pay salaries, buy equipment, whatever.
Exactly. It perfectly aligns the investor's interest with the company spending the money prudently. The investor wants the company to use the cash effectively because that's literally when their slices are generated.
That changes the whole dynamic, doesn't it? It's less about just buying equity and more about co-funding the actual operations. Really clever.
It shifts it towards co-stewardship, yeah. Now, this whole dynamic slice allocating process, it doesn't go on forever. There's a point where the pie freezes.
Freezes, meaning it stops adjusting. When does that happen?
Typically, it freezes when the venture hits a key milestone of stability. Usually, that means it can afford to pay everyone their fair market salaries in cash consistently.
So when it's profitable or cash flow positive enough to operate like a normal company?
Right. Or, alternatively, if it raises a significant round of external funding, like a series of venture capital investment. At that point, the dynamic allocation stops, the final percentages based on all the accumulated slices are locked in, and those percentages convert into formal traditional equity shares or units.
Okay, that makes sense. It's a bridge to get you to traditional equity, but a much fairer bridge.
Yeah.
But what about, well, people leaving? That's always messy in startups. How does the dynamic pie handle departures?
Ah, yes. The recovery framework. This is designed specifically to make departures predictable and fair, avoiding those huge fights over who gets what when someone leaves early.
Okay, I'm listening. This is a major pain point.
It lays out basically 4 scenarios with clear rules. First, if someone is fired for good reason, for cause, misconduct, serious underperformance, or if they resign without good reason, basically, they just decide to leave without a justifiable cause related to the company's action.
So just bail.
Right. In those cases, the person generally forfeits the slices they earn from non-cash contributions, like their time or ideas. But importantly, they usually get reimbursed for any cash they put in.
Interesting. So you lose the sweat equity, but you get your cash back. That protects the company from carrying someone who isn't contributing, but it doesn't penalize them financially beyond losing the upside.
Exactly. It feels quite balanced. Now, the other side. If you're fired for no good reason, maybe the company pivots or are layoffs. It's not your fault.
Okay.
Or if you resign with good reason, maybe the company fundamentally changes your role without agreement or creates a hostile environment.
So the company effectively pushes you out or makes it impossible to stay.
In those cases, you keep all your accumulated slices, both from cash and non-cash contributions. Your earned share is protected because the departure wasn't your fault or was justified.
Wow, that takes so much ambiguity and potential for conflict off the table. It replaces subjective arguments with clear, pre-agreed rules. Algorithmic fairness, almost.
That's the term, yeah. Algorithmic fairness. It protects both the individual and the venture.
Okay, this structure is undeniably innovative. It seems engineered, to be fair. But changing the economic plumbing like this, it must have deeper effects, right? On how people feel, on motivation.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the psychological side.
Absolutely. The psychological impacts are, I think, one of the most fascinating aspects. It's argued that this model significantly boosts both intrinsic and extrinsic motivation.
How so?
Well, extrinsically, it's obvious every bit of effort or resource you put at risk is directly, transparently linked to a potential future reward, your slice count. But intrinsically, knowing that your effort is seen, measured, and valued fairly by the system itself can be incredibly motivating.
So it's not just about the potential money later, but the immediate validation of seeing your slice count go up, that constant feedback loop.
Precisely. Think about the neuroscience of rewards. Regular, predictable, positive feedback, like seeing your share increase with each contribution, can trigger those dopamine releases, reinforcing the behavior. It makes the very act of contributing feel more rewarding in the moment.
And it tackles that massive workplace morale killer.
Yeah.
Feeling like things are unfair. We've all been there, right? Seeing someone else get ahead unfairly or feeling your own work isn't recognized.
Definitely. There's a concept called Adams equity theory, which basically says we feel distress when we perceive an imbalance between our inputs and outputs compared to others. Traditional workplaces are often breeding grounds for this feeling: opaque salaries, subjective promotions.
Yeah, the rumor mill about who makes what.
Right. The dynamic pie confronts this head on. Because everyone uses the same transparent formula to convert contributions into slices, the input to output ratio is explicit and objective for everyone. You can literally see the math. It dramatically cuts down on that mental energy wasted wondering, is this fair?
Because the fairness is built into the algorithm, and everyone can see it. That level of transparency, it must build trust, right? No secret deals, no favoritism possible if the formula applies equally.
That's a key outcome. Radical transparency and the equal application of rules eliminate huge swaths of conventional bias and the suspicion of, backroom deals. This builds a foundation of trust.
And trust is the bedrock of, well, everything in a team. Psychological safety.
Exactly. Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety is directly relevant here. When people trust the system, when they trust they'll be treated fairly and their contributions recognized impartially, they feel safer.
And feeling safe means they're more willing to stick their necks out, take risks.
Yes, to offer unconventional ideas, to admit mistakes, to contribute that extra discretionary effort because they're not afraid of being unfairly penalized or overlooked. They trust the system has their back, in a way.
Okay, this is fascinating, but fostering empathy. Can an economic model really make people care more about each other? That sounds a bit optimistic.
It sounds idealistic, I know, but think about the mechanics. It's what some call an algorithmic nudge. Your individual share, your percentage, is always your slices divided by the total slices of everyone involved.
Right, it's relative to the whole pie.
Precisely. So the most rational, self-interested way to increase the future value of your own slices is to help increase the value and size of the entire pie.
So if I help my colleagues solve a tough problem, or share information that helps the whole project move faster, that makes the whole pie bigger, which ultimately benefits my own slice too.
Exactly. Helping others isn't just nice, it's economically rational within this system. It shifts the mindset from me versus you, competition over fixed slices, to us together trying to grow the whole pie. You become co-investors in a shared destiny.
Co-investors in a shared destiny. I like that.
And the hypothesis is that this explicit interdependence, where you can literally see how your success is tied to others' contributions, can genuinely foster mutual appreciation and gratitude. It's hard to resent someone when you see them working hard to grow the pie you both share. It actively counters that hyper-individualistic tendency. What do you think? Does that track with team dynamics you've seen?
It's a compelling logic. If you align incentives that way, yeah, maybe it could nudge behavior. Okay, so if it changes individual psychology and motivation, what does that mean for the team or the organization as a whole? How does it actually play out in terms of conflict and structure?
Well, on the conflict front, we touched on this, but it's huge. Those bitter founder equity disputes, a major killer of early-stage companies.
Absolutely.
By replacing subjective fixed agreements with this objective ongoing calculation, it aims to just eliminate the basis for that specific, very common argument. The math is the math.
Have we seen this work in the real world? Are there companies actually using this and avoiding those fights?
Yes, there are encouraging examples. The team behind Hardcover.app used slicing pie. That's the specific methodology for about 3 years. They had around 15 contributors with varying levels of commitment coming and going.
And it worked. No major blow-ups over equity.
Reportedly, it allowed them to manage those fluctuations without the usual conflict. Another example is a tech company, Encode.org. They built the principles into their legal setup, and after 18 months, the feedback was that the resulting ownership structure felt genuinely fair and clear to everyone.
Fair and clear. That's the goal, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's powerful. Okay, how does the governance work then? How do decisions get made compared to other models like, say, worker co-ops or DAOs?
It's an interesting middle ground. Worker cooperatives often use one member, one vote, focusing on democratic equality regardless of contribution level.
Right.
DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, frequently use token-weighted voting. The more tokens you hold, the more voting power you have.
Which sounds okay, but
yeah.
Can't you just buy tokens? Doesn't that risk the wealthiest people just buying control? A sort of deutocracy?
That's exactly the concern. With many DAOs, wealth equals power. If you're rich, you can potentially buy disproportionate influence.
So how does dynamic pie governance avoid that?
Dynamic pi entities typically use contribution-weighted governance. Your voting power is proportional to your slices or the tokens representing those slices. But, and this is key, you can only earn those slices through verified at-risk contributions. You can't just buy them on an open market.
Ah, so influence is tied directly to earned stake, to proven skin in the game, not just deep pockets. That's meritocratic, in a sense.
That's the term often used, yes. Meritocratic governance, where decision-making power aligns with demonstrated contribution and risk-taking.
Clever. But scaling. What happens when you have hundreds or even thousands of contributors? Tracking every single contribution sounds like an administrative nightmare.
That is definitely a major challenge. Manually tracking everything for a huge group would be incredibly difficult, maybe impossible.
So what's the solution? Robots.ai.
Pretty much, yeah. The proposed solutions lean heavily on technology. Think AI tools that can automatically monitor digital work tracking code commits on GitHub, design updates on Figma, document edits, and integrate that data seamlessly with project management tools to calculate slices automatically.
Okay, so tech handles the tracking burden. What about the governance itself? Thousands of people voting on every little decision? That sounds like chaos, or at least gridlock.
Complete gridlock. You'd likely get massive voter apathy, too. Nobody wants to vote on 50 things a day.
Been there in some online communities.
Right. So for larger scale, dynamic pi organizations would almost certainly need to evolve more complex, tiered governance structures, maybe like large cooperatives or mature DAOs do.
Meaning, like, electing representatives.
Yeah.
Delegating authority.
Exactly. You might have elected councils, specialized working groups with delegated authority over specific areas, finance, product, etc. You'd need ways to balance that core principle of contribution-weighted influence with practical, efficient decision-making.
Makes sense. And overall performance. Do these kinds of equitable models actually perform better? Are they more resilient? Is there any evidence?
Well, there's existing research on worker cooperatives that's quite suggestive. Studies often find they have higher productivity levels and tend to be more resilient during economic downturns.
Why is that?
It's thought to be because they prioritize keeping people employed and working together to solve problems rather than immediate layoffs to protect shareholder profits. There's more shared commitment.
Okay.
The hypothesis for the dynamic pi model is that it could potentially amplify these effects because the link between individual contribution, collective success, and personal reward is so direct and transparent, it could foster even greater innovation, commitment, and stability, especially with that fair recovery framework handling departures smoothly.
If everyone feels like a true owner, they're likely to act like one. That's compelling. Okay, let's pull the lens back even further, the really big picture. If this model, or something like it, took off, what could it mean for society, for wealth distribution, for the future of work itself?
This is where it gets potentially transformative. As an alternative ownership enterprise, or AOE, the dynamic pi model is fundamentally designed to spread wealth more broadly.
How specifically?
Think about the traditional paths to wealth. It's mostly through owning capital stocks, property, businesses bought with money. This model explicitly creates a parallel path to building significant ownership, significant wealth through contribution, through your time, your skills, your ideas, your effort.
So someone without existing capital, like a talented young designer or developer, could theoretically build real, substantial equity stakes across multiple projects just by consistently contributing valuable work over time.
Exactly. Their accumulated slices across successful ventures could become a significant asset portfolio, a form of wealth built purely on contribution, not initial investment. This could genuinely create a new, broader middle class of contributors.
A middle class whose wealth comes from doing, not just owning capital. That's a profound shift. Does existing research support this kind of effect?
Well, again, looking at worker cooperatives, studies do suggest they tend to have narrower pay gaps between the highest and lowest earners and contribute to lower overall income inequality in their communities. You can measure this with things like the Gini coefficient, which tracks wealth distribution.
So there's precedent for more equitable models reducing inequality.
Yes. The dynamic pi, by systematically rewarding contribution with ownership, could structurally embed that more equitable distribution into the economy.
And what about the nature of work itself? You hear so much about the gig economy's flexibility versus the security of traditional jobs. Where does this fit?
It really tries to be a third way, a synthesis of the best of both. You get the flexibility of the gig economy, contribute to projects that fit your skills, work from anywhere, maybe work on multiple projects.
Wow, the flexibility is attractive.
But unlike traditional gig work, you're not just a temporary contractor who's gone tomorrow. You're building ownership. You get the potential long-term upside and a form of security that comes from having a real stake in the outcome.
Yeah.
You're a co-investor, not just hired help.
How does that stack up against something like universal basic income, or UBI, which people talk about as a response to automation?
UBI is crucial as a potential safety net, ensuring people can meet basic needs, especially if automation displaces many jobs. It provides unconditional support.
Right.
But UBI by itself doesn't necessarily address the human need for purpose, for feeling valued for what we do. The dynamic pie operates differently. It maintains that verifiable link between contribution and reward. It's a framework for organizing meaningful work and ensuring that work is fairly valued and rewarded, potentially fulfilling that need for purpose that UBI alone might not.
So one's a floor, the other's a framework for building on top of that floor.
You could see it that way, yeah. And if a system like this, which transparently rewards fair collaboration, becomes widespread, think about the potential impact on trust.
Trust in the system, trust in institutions.
Exactly. If people feel the economic game isn't rigged, that their efforts genuinely translate into fair rewards, it could strengthen social cohesion, maybe rebuild some faith in our collective institutions. It pushes back against cynicism and fragmentation.
Okay, but there's always a flip side, isn't there?
Yeah.
You mentioned the model fosters strong in-group cohesion. Could that be a weakness too? Could it lead to lots of tight-knit, successful dynamic pie tribes that are disconnected from each other, maybe even hostile, weakening broader civic bonds?
That is absolutely the primary systemic risk. You could end up with highly efficient, loyal, internal teams or networks that become very insular, competing digital tribes, as you put it.
So how do you prevent that? How do you get the benefits of cohesion without creating isolated silos?
It requires thinking in the ecosystem level, not just the individual venture level. Things like developing open standards and interoperability protocols so different dynamic pie entities can collaborate easily.
Shared tools, shared infrastructure.
Yes, investing in common goods, shared software libraries, legal templates, maybe even dispute resolution mechanisms. And actively fostering networks or federations of these entities that are united by a larger purpose, encouraging cross-pollination and collective action beyond their individual boundaries. It's about building bridges between the islands.
That makes sense. But for any of this ecosystem to even get off the ground, you need, well, legal structures, right? How does the law even recognize an organization run by algorithmically adjusting slices?
That's the critical bottleneck right now. We desperately need updated legal and regulatory frameworks. Currently, if you just start operating like this, especially purely on-chain, you might default to being classified as a general partnership.
Which means unlimited personal liability for all members. Yikes.
Exactly. Nobody wants that. It's a massive barrier to adoption.
So what's the path forward legally?
We're seeing some early steps. Wyoming's DAO LLC law, for example, tries to provide a legal wrapper offering limited liability for decentralized organizations. That's a start.
But maybe not the perfect fit?
Possibly not tailor-made for this specific dynamic contribution model. The report we looked at actually proposes a completely new corporate form. They call it a decentralized contributor organization, or DCO.
A DCO. What would make that different?
It would be designed from the ground up for this model. Key features would include accommodating dynamically changing membership, providing clear, limited liability, establishing tax clarity, and, perhaps most radically, offering legal recognition of algorithmic governance.
Whoa. Legal recognition of algorithmic governance, meaning the code itself, the rules of the dynamic pie, could have legal standing as part of the company's operating agreement.
That's the visionary idea, yes. Making the transparent, automated rules legally binding. That would fundamentally change how organizations are structured and managed, and it would dramatically de-risk participation in these models.
That's definitely cutting-edge stuff. Okay, this is all incredibly thought-provoking, potentially game-changing, but it's still largely theoretical or in early stages, right? Yeah. How do we actually test this rigorously?
Good question. The proposal includes a concrete plan for a pilot study.
Okay.
Take a small team, maybe 5 to 10 people, give them a well-defined project to work on for, say, 6 months, and have them meticulously use the PySlicer software or a similar tool to track all their at-risk contribution.
And then measure everything.
Exactly. Use a mix of methods, quantitative stuff like project velocity, tracking deadlines met, but also qualitative things, detailed logs of any conflicts that arise, regular interviews with participants about their experience, and importantly, validated psychological scales, things like Amy Edmondson's psychological safety scale, measures of trust, motivation, perceived fairness.
So gather hard data and real human experiences to see if it actually delivers on its promises in a controlled setting.
Precisely. Get empirical evidence beyond anecdotes. Does it really reduce conflict? Does it boost motivation? Does it feel fair? That's what a pilot study would aim to find out.
Okay. So wrapping this up, we've journeyed through this really interesting concept, the dynamic pie, trying to blend market energy with collective fairness.
Yeah, that core idea of verifiably linking reward directly to at-risk contribution. We've seen its potential for individuals' motivation, fairness, for teams less conflict, more trust, and even for society, maybe broader wealth, a new future for work.
And we've also hit on the challenges, scalability, governance at scale, the legal hurdles, the risk of fragmentation. So the final thought for you listening right now. As technology, especially automation, keeps changing the rules of the game, what kind of economic systems do you think we need?
How do we best serve our deep human needs for purpose, for fairness, for connection in the economy of the future?
Is a model like the dynamic pie or something inspired by it a realistic path towards a more balanced future? Or do its complexities and risks mean we should be looking in completely different directions?
It's a huge question, and there are no easy answers. We genuinely love to hear your reflections on this deep dive. What stood out to you? What concerns you? Where do you see things heading?